Hi, I'm Mohannad of Al-Bustan Seeds of Culture. I recently had a conversation with the esteemed Egyptian film critic and film programmer, Joseph Fahim. I listed off my top 20 films of the 20th century, and Joseph, who didn't know what films were on the list, shared his insightful thoughts about each of them. Let's get started. Number 20 on my list of favorite films from the 20th century is Point Blank, John Borman, 1967.
Awesome film. Absolutely adore it. I think like one of the greatest anti-heroes of all time, and Lee Marvin. It's dirty, it's hardcore. It also like definitely captures the nihilism. This was definitely captures that sort of moral ambiguity and moral disintegration that would define the Vietnam era.
Number 19 on my list, Three Women, Robert Altman, 1977.
You can't go wrong with Altman. One of my favorites of his as well. Amazing performances by Sissy Spacek and everyone. Um, it's the closest thing we have to a an American equivalent of Ingmar Bergman's persona. Uh, Penetrating, beautiful, and also like another movie that for Robert Altman that you can simply it's very different from everything that he's done. Not there is anything in his oeuvre that is similar to one another, but definitely a standout. One of my favorites as well.
Number 18, The House is Black, Forough Farrokhzad, 1962.
I really hate that we're agreeing on everything right now, but another favorite's definitely one of the greatest Middle Eastern movies of all time. An Egyptian movie that was screened in Cannes a few years ago, Kudyumuddin, was also made about the same subject, quite similar to it. And along the years, it proved to be, I think, like one of the most influential Middle Eastern movies of all time.
And next, number 17, Night and Fog, Alan Rene, 1956.
It's a movie that I constantly referenced in evoking something that is as horrible and atrocious as the Holocaust with little fanfare. It's probably the most atypical movie about the Holocaust, done in the most effective way by letting the viewers imagine what could have happened and by also respecting, by taking a moral point of view, by not showing the horrors, but by evoking them. Incredible film, definitely, and a career filled with radical, amazing films by one of the greatest French directors. This is also definitely stand out. Also, one of the greatest short movies of all time, probably in the top 10.
Number 16, To Live, Kurosawa Akira, 1952.
Along the years, you'd find lots of camps with when it comes to Japanese cinema. Those who think that Kurosawa is God and those who think that Uzo is God. And I'm in the latter group. And yet, this is definitely my favorite Kurosawa movie. It's one of those movies that I cry every single time I watch it. There are one specific scene near the end that I think is possibly one of the most moving sequences in film history. It's also one of the very, very, very few movies that could actually change your life, could make you want to become a better person. Amazing humanist film.
Number 15, I Am Cuba, Mikhail Kalatozov, 1964.
I know that some will find it blasphemous if I said that this was the best movie made about any revolution, any time in history, because I'm sure the Russians would disagree. But in terms of sophistication, in terms of visual virtuosity, in terms of that sheer openness of its emotion, this is certainly, at least in my view, is probably the best movie made about revolution. Incredible film.
At number 14, The Dupes, Tawfiq Saleh, 1972.
I mean, the story of the making of the film is even great as definitely one of the greatest Arab movies of all time, based on one of the seminal Palestinian novels of all time. But the incredible feat of having an Egyptian director hired by the Syrian General Organization to make one of the greatest movies made about Palestine is simply was a feat that will probably never happen again. I mean, definitely will not happen again. Um, Nihilistic, um, incredibly moving, and sadly, it's still one of the most relevant films made about Palestine.
Number 13, The Miracle of Morgan Creek, Preston Sturges, 1944.
You can't go wrong with Preston Sturges. I would disagree with Mohannad that this is definitely not my favorite Preston Sturges. I would go for The Lady Eve. It's funny. It's beautiful. I mean, Preston Sturges, like the few movies that he directed, were almost flawless. I would definitely recommend The Lady Eve better. Also, Sullivan's Travels, but certainly a great movie as well.
Number 12, Umberto D. Vittorio De Sica, 1952.
Along the years, I became less of a fan of De Sica and more of a bigger fan of Roberto Rossellini simply for his like hardcore realism. And yet I still have soft spot for him. The movie is incredibly moving and with a great dignity in it. It's a hardcore melodrama. I think the older I grew, the more I became appreciative of De Sica's far lesser known comedies. And yet, among his, I think, realist films, Bicycle Thieves and Shoeshine, um, definitely the most heartbreaking of De Sica's films.
Number 11, The Puppet Master, Hu Shaoshen, 1993.
A director that will take you a long time to definitely appreciate his oeuvre. Certainly elusive, but yeah, incredible how this director from Taiwan has made an entire career out of completely shunning narrative and making movies, including this one, that definitely touches upon history by using the most minimalist of gestures. Also incredible film.
At number 10, In a Lonely Place, Nicholas Ray, 1950.
Mohannad will definitely hate me when I say that, but it seems that In a Lonely Place is every middle-aged man's favorite movie these days, with the great performance from Humphrey Bogart. It's certainly one of the best movies made about scriptwriting and also this sort of threatened masculinity. There is a lot of debate about what is Humphrey Bogart's best performance, and some, of course, would say Side Casablanca, some will say Maltese Falcon. I don't think anything. Some, of course, would say his Oscar-winning turn in the African Queen.
African Queen.
And the African Queen. My favorite, I think, is definitely, and I think his most complex role is in The Lonely Place. Incredible performance, and was also a great turn by Lord Graham.
At number 9, The Grapes of Wrath, John Ford, 1940.
One of the most conservative directors in Hollywood history made one of the greatest liberal statement in Hollywood's history. I am a big fan of the novel. It's probably among my favorite 3 books of all time. I was always very skeptic about how John Ford, how he would deal with the ending, because the original ending of the book is very controversial and it's among the most powerful, I would say, in literature history. And yet the ending, he managed to deliver something equally powerful, certainly less scandalous. And yeah, it's a great, one of the few great adaptations that definitely preserve the soul of a novel by offering something fresh and unique in its own, with amazing performance, of course, by Henry Fonda.
Number 8, The Exterminating Angel, Louis Buñuel, 1962.
My absolute favorite Louis Buñuel film. I think of all the movies we've mentioned, this is definitely among my personal favorites. It's cheeky. It has one of the most original premises there is. A bunch of bourgeois guests get stuck in a party they can't leave. Incredibly original, and it tickles you. Like if you ever had, or if ever were bothered by the European bourgeois, this is the movie to watch to just like make you blow off some steam. And the movie is more than half a century old. It's still one of the most provoking films you'll see, and it's very, very, very funny as well. Darkly comic though.
Number 7, City Lights, Charlie Chaplin, 1931.
My favorite Chaplin, one of the greatest romantic comedies of all time. One of definitely Chaplin's greatest ending, possibly the greatest ending of any comedy in the silent era. It's Chaplin at the height of his powers. Again, I'm usually lost for words when I talk about this film because I have a very soft spot for it. It's again, I have constantly talk about the ending because it's probably the only time in the entire films, in the entire over of Chaplin, where you actually see him for what he is in that final scene. Moving, beautiful. I mean, it's a movie that has stood the test of time.
Number 6, Man with a Movie Camera, Jigar Vertov, 1929.
It's like the last poll done by Sight and Sound, which was several years ago for best documentaries. This silent film still being voted and considered the greatest documentary of all time for a good reason. Um, it's it's a city symphony that defies what we expect of city symphonies. It's also what defies what we expect of nonfiction filmmaking. It's avant-gardist in a way. It's also documents Russia or like the Soviet Union at a certain point in history, and it's still unlike anything you've seen. Um, this is a movie that uses the power of cinema as a visual medium in a way that still feels light years ahead of everything else.
At number 5, Cries and Whispers, Ingmar Bergman, 1972.
Red is when I think about Cries and Whispers. Bergman has always been thought as like a very harsh filmmaker that presents movies about very difficult emotions where people have no qualms of saying to each other that they hate each other. Certainly a difficult film, cruel in parts, and yet this is the movie that really epitomizes what everything Bergman represents. That the world is cool. There's lots of hatred, and yet what really matters is those very transient moments of pure joy and love that we have for each other. Um, um, just from every single frame you see this, do you understand why Bergman is still considered one of the greatest filmmakers in history?
At number 4, M, Fritz Lang, 1931.
Fritz Lang has made an entire career of discussing, of highlighting, or of exploring individuals and institutions. His movies have always felt prophetic, and I think this was one of the films that anticipated the mania of what happened with World War II and the rise of Nazism. Incredible performance by Peter Lorre, still shocking to this very day. And the film noir Parnan, is this how you say it?
Barman.
And the film noir Parnan.
At number 3, A Man Escaped, Robert Bresson, 1956.
The most incredible thing about this movie is it already spoils the ending for you, from the title of what happens the entire film. It's one of Bresson's purest films, purest in its hopeful stance, purest in terms of its cinema language. It's a thriller of sorts, done in the only way that somebody like Bresson does a thriller, which is in a way that is graceful, that is unexploitative, that is not particularly thrilling, and that is all about the strength and the perseverance of the human. The only way to describe it really is this. It's a very pure film.
At number 2, The Life of OHARU, Mizoguchi Kenji, 1952.
Probably my favorite film by Mizoguchi as well. Uh, Tragic, heartbreaking, and I think of the many films that was made up like by Mizoguchi in the post-war era. This really encapsulates his lifelong occupancy with oppressed women and done with a language that's still unlike anything that we have now and completely revolutionary, um, completely his own. And this mix between this modernist language and melodrama is something that it's still very unique. And it's the only way to describe it is just Mizoguchian and nothing else.
And my favorite film of the 20th century is Army of Shadows, John Pierre Melville, 1969.
Okay, first of all, I'm really sad that this list does not include Ozo, my favorite filmmaker. I think it's something I can never forgive Mohannad for. I mean, Tokyo Story, Early Spring, come on. Good Morning, one of the greatest comedies of all time. My God, anyhow. Um, it's you cannot argue with Army of Shadows and Melville definitely his masterpiece, and I love. So I mean, I'll let it go this time. Um, my God, I mean, what a towering work! I mean, a movie that shows the war in the most unglorified manner whatsoever. That shows the resistance and that shows the left in a way that is devoid of any heroism. Um, Incredibly structured and edited and acted. Incredible cinematography. Um, there's it's a movie that really put movies now that are made about the war in the shadow simply because um, both the style of the film and the themes they explore, uh, they are far from the prepackaged war movies that we see these days, in the sense that this is a movie of great moral complexity that gives you no easy answers and that puts into question of why we do what we do. And I really find it very difficult that you leave this movie viewing war and viewing this concept of heroism the same way again. Cannot argue with it, sadly, but yeah, a masterpiece.
Thank you for watching. Do you agree with my taste? Do you have your own favorites you'd like to share? I'll see you soon.